A real live dragon. The more you see of Agartha, the more. Other. 12. A real live dragon. The more you see of Agartha, the more you wonder that the outer and inner earths exist in such close proximity to one another. There are similarities and differences in the buildings and infrastructure, similarities in the scenery. Next time the hovercraft stopped, it was in front of quite a large, round building with a hatch on the front. I pressed a button near the door. A friendly face appeared in the opening. "What do you want to eat?" I asked. "We're at a food bar and we can order vegetarian food here." There were tables and chairs among the pots of plants outside. The children crowded forward. The friendly-faced person showed them pictures of what they could order. Laughing cheerfully, the girls pointed to what they wanted, and I helped the others order. Nancy wasn't hungry, and just wanted a glass of water. The rest of us enjoyed attractive meals served in the flower garden. This was the most common kind of bar or restaurant in Telos. The food was prepared in the large, round house and distributed from there. "Let's get on," called Lex when we'd all finished eating. The hovercraft was nearby. No parking problems here, as it didn't touch the ground. I was lifting up Ellie under her arms when Nancy stopped me. "I want to go home," she demanded. "I've got a terrible headache." "Ellie's coming with me." Ellie begged and begged, but Nancy was firm. I arranged another vehicle for them and programmed in Nancy's address, but Wendy wouldn't go with them. Ellie, devastated, waved until she could see us no longer. "What a hard-hearted mother," remarked grandmother crossly. "Little Ellie is a nice child, and we could easily have looked after her." "Nancy is probably one of the most normal people ever," Lex observed. "People who are thoroughly normal can't cope with the atmosphere here. Unfortunately, it's probably best for her to go home." I nodded in agreement. I felt a small hand in mine, and a lock of gleaming, dark hair brushed my hand as I was getting into our transport. "Can I sit with you?" the child asked, and I smiled and nodded. Suddenly, the hovercraft dipped earthwards with unusual rapidity. The woodland here was less dense, with moss and flowers on the ground. We drew up beside a mountain with a cave. With a finger on his lips, Lex waved us out of the vehicle. He led us to a camouflaged shelter where there were clumps of grass to sit on. Sitting quietly, we wondered what was going on. We soon found out. The first thing we saw was smoke coming from the cave, followed by huge smoky nostrils, and a shiny green head with large eyes and tiny ears. Soon a whole dragon had appeared, its tail swishing the ground. Beside it was a small dragon with less intense coloring, presumably a baby. I put my hand to Wendy's mouth to keep her from screaming. She stared, and then buried her head in my shoulder. Grandmother and Lex were holding hands, watching the unusual creatures in delight. I was glad Nancy wasn't with us. She would have been terrified. Titch didn't even growl. He sat at my side as though turned to stone, staring. I'm not really used to children, and I didn't notice until it was too late that Wendy had crept up to the dragon. Frozen in horror, I watched her put out her hand to stroke its nose. Wendy's entire being seemed to emanate love. Grandmother and Lex got ready to rescue her. To our surprise, the dragon stuck out a long, pink tongue and gave Wendy a wet, steamy lick on the face. Then the dragon shook its huge body, checked that the baby dragon was close, it was definitely a dragon mother, and spread its enormous wings, while the baby dragon did the same. They rose slowly and majestically, flapping their wings in farewell. The adult dragon turned her head and gave us a long, keen look. My grandmother nearly fainted as she dried her tears, laughing in relief. Wendy stood watching the amazing animals until Lex took her hand. "Come on, little one, let's go," he said. Wendy ran up and hugged me. "It was great," she exclaimed. "I'm going to tell my mom and dad all about it." Puzzled, I looked at her. "Mum?" I wondered. I knew she was dead. "I quite often talk to Mum," she declared happily, pointing to her heart. "She's inside me, and she always answers." Petey thought that Ellie was an amazing child, but here was another one. Maybe there are plenty of amazing children, but I'm not used to meeting them. With Wendy chattering happily at my side, I alighted from the hovercraft at the next stop. Grandmother and Lex were heading straight for something that looked like an aircraft hangar, which is exactly what it turned out to be. I knew Agra was extensive, but I hadn't really understood quite how extensive. This was a transport station for hovercraft of various sorts. It wasn't bleak and noisy and full of brash travelers weighed down with luggage, like our mainline stations. There were tunnels here reaching across the inner earth and right up to the outside. These crossed Agartha, as well as the planet's crust. The tunnels had existed for many thousands of years. You could go nearly anywhere in the small, covered vehicles which were parked in rows. As usual, grandmother clapped her hands in surprise and wonder as Lex reeled off facts about the amazing central station. Wendy asked, "Uncle Tim, do you think I could go and visit Mum from here?" "She doesn't really live in these parts," I objected, upset. "To get to her, you need a special sort of plane which they don't have here. You can't visit the dead, Wendy. You can only be sure that they are alive and well in another dimension. But you have her image within you, like you said, and that is lovely." "T'll have to wait until PM Big," sighed Wendy. "Anyway, I can see elementals, as Dad calls them. I usually tell him that I have tiny friends who are sometimes quite see-through. Some of them have pointed hats and some have hair like sunshine and small, transparent wings pretty much like bumblebees." "Can you see them here?" grandmother asked. "Of course, and we talk about everything." Wendy's eyes widened. "Is there something wrong with that?" "Not in the least. You are very lucky." Grandmother stroked the dark hair of this wonderful child. "I think we've seen enough for today," exclaimed Lex, and we clambered back into the hovercraft with Titch beside me as lookout. Now I understood the dragon's behavior. Wendy was more elemental than human, although she looked human enough as she curled up close and rested her head on my shoulder. She was sleeping soundly, sucking her thumb, by the time we got home. I carried the sleeping child into grandmother's house. Lex disappeared momentarily, returning with the news that he'd contacted Wendy's father, who would soon collect his daughter. I knew that the contact had been telepathic, but grandmother was confused. "I thought that phones were on the surface of the planet," she said. "We've got a good one in our heads," I teased because she already knew that. Grandmother smiled and asked me to open the door, just as a loud knocking was heard. A dark, slightly stocky man entered. He grinned amiably and said, "I'm Wendy's dad, Edmund. Have you got my charming monkey here?" Behind him appeared a countenance which could only belong to a small, mischievous boy. "This is my nephew, Wendy's cousin," continued Edmund. He arrived today and was disappointed to find his cousin was out. He's called Pierre. He's 9 and has come because his parents died in a car crash. I'm going to take care of him. Wendy is welcome to come as often as she wants, such a sweet child, my grandmother interrupted, and the lad too, by the way. I like children and can always find something interesting to do. Please sit down, and my grandson will fetch the lass. I returned with the child, who was still fast asleep. She opened her eyes briefly and mumbled, "Dad," and then slumbered again. Pierre stayed calmly behind his uncle, watching his sleeping cousin in amazement. Children can sleep safely even thousands of feet inside the earth, in a brilliant kingdom called Agartha. 13. Nancy and Ellie returned home. Manal was waiting in the arbor at my house. The slight dampness in the pale night air intensified the scent of flowers. I got us hot drinks and biscuits, and we sat down comfortably. Titch laid his great head in Manal's lap. I realized this was a great honor. "Now you've met other surface dwellers who have come here and want to stay," began the man with the long, nearly white hair. "Just like you, they have had certain experiences which have brought them here. People from Earth don't end up here by accident. It wasn't by accident that your ship went down and you were saved. Neither was it an accident that Lex came to us, he had known about us for a long time. However, Nancy isn't particularly welcome. We knew she wouldn't fit in here, but we gave her a chance because she is your friend. It hasn't gone well. I have talked to her, and she's returning to the surface via Mount Shasta tomorrow. We'll provide financial help as she couldn't get home otherwise. It's not what Ellie wants," I sighed. "But she can always return when she's older if she doesn't forget us. We've decided it's your duty to go with them, Tim." I guess I looked far from delighted, for he began laughing. "You only need put them on the first flight to Seattle. Then you can return immediately, if you're not tempted to stay a while on Earth, that is." I shook my head firmly, and he laughed again. "We'll wake you in plenty of time tomorrow. Go to Nancy's and there will be a hovercraft there. Nancy will be taking precious stones with her, so she'll manage financially. Arniel wants to see you as soon as you get back, so contact me at once. Have a good trip." With a smile, he hugged me and disappeared out the door. When I looked around, he was gone. In the morning I was awakened by a small bird chirruping like a canary on my shoulder. I got dressed and hurried to Nancy's house. Nancy was sitting outside on her suitcase, and Ellie was on the grass, tears streaming down her face. Titch sat down beside the girl and looked as if he was trying to comfort her. She buried her head in his huge doggy neck. I lifted her gently into the hovercraft. Nancy inclined her head slightly in my direction and asked, "Are you coming with us?" "Only as far as the plane." She got into the vehicle, and I sat in front. She avoided looking at me, and I hoped the whole journey would be over quickly. "I had expected you to be more honorable," remarked Nancy. "I never believed my husband's best friend would be so unreliable." Honestly, I was astonished. "How am I unreliable?" I asked. "First you came on to me and then, as soon as we came here, you cast me aside for that blonde tart. You know, that woman you danced with. I was brought here under false pretenses. I feel betrayed. This isn't paradise. It's just the opposite." "You'll probably find you brought that with you," I retorted, suppressing my anger. "Haven't you learned the 7 virtues which I've repeated to you every day? We live by them in this country. Appreciation, compassion, forgiveness, humility, understanding, valor, and unconditional love, of course." Ellie came out with this line. I thought she drifted off next to Titch. My dog made a talking noise, one of those dog mumbles which most dog owners would recognize. "And that doesn't include jealousy," I added, "especially as I've never encouraged you." "That was your interpretation." Nancy didn't have time to reply, because the craft landed at the enormous station I described earlier. We drove along a track into a tunnel. Ellie put her arms around Titch, but he was sitting bolt upright, staring into the darkness. There were small, weak lamps on the tunnel walls, and I could see Nancy's rigid face, her mouth drooping. Then she put her hand on my arm. "Can't you forgive me so things will be like they were before?" she asked. "Then I can come and visit you sometime. I'm rich now, thanks to your generous friends. Getting back here won't be as easy as you think," I replied grimly. "You were here thanks to me, and won't be able to return unless I wish it. That's how it works." Nancy was silent for the rest of the journey, while Ellie chattered about all her experiences. But she was happy to be getting home to their old house and her friends. They would never believe her stories. As we got out of the hovercraft, she chirruped, "Soon I'll be able to ring Garth and Linny and Polly and Ann on our phone. And Mum will drive us on trips in the summer." The heavy gate reverberated with a hollow clang behind us as we climbed the stairway to Mount Shasta. Outside, in the parking lot, was a taxi. The driver approached and called out my name. The taxi was pre-booked and would drive us straight to the airport. We got in. I'll never forget Nancy's last words to me. I held out my hand and was going to give her a friendly hug, but she pulled away and stood on the bottom step to the airplane. "I hate you, Tim," she declared gravely. "I'm going to get my revenge and really hurt you. I'm going to do my best to stop Ellie ever returning here. I despise you, Timothy." I didn't believe Nancy for a moment. She had a quick temper. But it didn't feel good. I reached down and patted Big Titch on the head. He licked my hand and I felt better at once. Dogs aren't just our best friends, they're more than that. They are our conscience, good or bad, and they lick away our troubles before they can grow worse, and their loyal faces bring us strength and courage. Titch and I returned to Telos without any further trouble, and I went straight to grandmother's house. Lex was there, of course, and Edmund, while Wendy and her cousin Pierre were chasing each other in the beautiful, little garden. It was lovely and restful hearing happy children and joyful laughter. Titch went off to join in at once. Lex laughed when he heard about my disagreeable leave-taking from Nancy. "Don't worry about that woman, she can't hurt you here, Tim," he said. "Forgive her, and pray that she gets the help she needs. Let go of all your thoughts about her. Transmit light and love to replace the bad. Remember that evil can't survive light, so transmit plenty of light." I already know all of this, but it never hurts to be reminded of good things, of the proximity of the great light. We Earthlings find this easy to forget. When I returned home, Arniel and Manol were waiting in the little arbor in my garden. I didn't bother to tell them about Nancy, I realized they already knew. "Forget Nancy and the surface and all the unpleasant things you have experienced," said Arniel. "We have other tidings. First, you are going on a trip with your grandmother and the others, and Manol is going with you as guide. It will be quite a long journey, because you need to know more about our land if you are going to stay here. It will be good for the children, too. Ellie ought to have stayed, as we need gifted children like her. But I think she will return, and maybe you will have to collect her, Tim. But that is for the future. When this trip is over, we would like you to operate as a bridge between the surface and here. You will be informed later what this will involve. But I can promise you plenty of exciting and instructive adventures. You will meet many people because you have much of the earthling still in you, which we need to preserve, as it is so positive. There is an acquaintance you will be making soon which will be especially important and instructive for all of us. 14. Meeting Saint Germain. We were back in a hovercraft, Manel, grandmother, and I, with Titch, Lex, Wendy, Edmund, and Pierre. Only Lex knew where we were going. In actual fact, grandmother and I knew very little about Agartha as a country and Telos as a town. We hadn't had much time to be tourists. Manel turned to smile at me, while the children pretended to be scared as we reached hover height, which seemed to be just above the trees at the moment. Sometimes, hover height was a few inches above the ground, but apparently we were going further, so the hovercraft flew like an aircraft. We were tightly strapped in, luckily. I shared with the children my feeling that this was an enchanted journey, and they loved the idea. There were huge birds flying in formation, well away from us. Smaller birds flew around us, chirping all the time. Finally, we were coming down. Fear gave way to excitement. Where were we? We landed in lush, green, fairly tall grass, which grows all over Agartha. Manel jumped out quickly and offered a gentlemanly hand to my grandmother before the other men got out. I looked around. Was it a South Sea island? There were palms all around, between which we glimpsed a sea as blue as the Mediterranean. We're going to meet someone here, Manel remarked. He and I are going to divide you between us and guide you around. He's visiting Agartha and has been here a while. He's from another dimension, but has asked to come here, much for the sake of Mariana, the medium who Tim will be in contact with. Look, here he is. A tall, elegant man approached rapidly from a palm grove. I recognized his happy, open face, but I couldn't think why. He came up to me, took both my hands, smiled with sparkling teeth, and embraced me. Then he hugged the other men. Imagine my surprise when he kissed grandmother's hand. She looked delighted. He crouched down to joke with the children, and even Titch was patted thoroughly without any objections. The dog licked him as if he was an old friend. I recognize you, observed grandmother, regarding him with a raised eyebrow. Are you an author or an actor? Are you British or Swedish? None of those, he replied with a smile. I'm Saint Germain, and I visit Agartha occasionally. They call me Master. I come from the stars, and was incarnated on earth as a spiritual teacher, long before Jesus Christ. I made appearances in France in the reign of Louis XIV. I'm a spiritual leader to many who live now, and here is one of my loyal pupils, as large as life, this little lady who is asking who I am. Grandmother. I exclaimed. Manel took the newcomer aside and appeared to receive instructions. Then, with a wave and a bow, Manel disappeared. The great master returned to us. I know where we're going now, he commented. We'll take the hovercraft a little further. In this part of the planet, there are obviously long distances, but there are also ways and means of shortening them. The hovercraft seemed to have a variety of speeds, and now it raced forward a few inches from the ground. When it stopped, the landscape had completely changed. We were at the foot of a fire-spewing volcano. The fire didn't pour downwards, but instead disappeared upwards into a dark cloud. At the great foot of the volcano was a village. There were the typical Agarthan buildings, round, roofless houses surrounded by luxuriant vegetation. Grandmother clasped her hands together, as was her habit, and cried, "How splendid! How impressive! How can they build so close to a volcano? Imagine if there was an eruption, like Vesuvius." Lex guffawed. Emily, dearest, this is Vesuvius. At least, that's what it's called on the surface, and we are just beneath Italy. Volcanoes erupt upwards here, not downwards. Grandmother stared at him. How do you know these things, Lex? She wondered, and the rest of us burst out laughing. Then we turned around to watch the amazing sight. I thought you were considered a magician, as there was no corpse in your coffin, but you seem very much alive, I remarked to Saint Germain. He laughed heartily. Where I come from, you can appear in various guises as necessary, he replied. That is possible here, too, but not in Telos, another part of Agartha. The fifth dimension is an ascendancy there, invisible to humans. This region has much ancient wisdom and history, which I'm interested in. I like gadding about in ancient history. I feel oddly at home in it. But let's continue with this tour. Just then, we heard a scream, followed by another scream. Wendy was running towards us. Pierre has drowned in the volcano. She screamed. He's all sooty. It was our turn to run now. The master, with his long legs, arrived first to find an amorphous blob of coal dust, spitting and hissing like an angry cat. It was not a laughing matter, but it was very comical. Pierre was trying to balance on the edge over there, Wendy explained. Then he slipped, and I had to pull him out, and Titch helped. He took Pierre's pullover in his teeth and pulled. My handsome dog turned up covered in soot too. Saint Germain took over now. This is something I have learned down the eons of time, he said, standing in front of the mucky boy and the sputtering dog. Titch's coat was black anyway, so now it was difficult to see where the soot ended and his nose began. The ancient master was before them, raising his hands and muttering. A black cloud lifted from the child and the dog. It disappeared into the sky, leaving the boy and dog to be hugged by everyone. Wendy was at my side, holding my hand. I should have rolled in it too, she said thoughtfully. Then I would have got lots of hugs too. I gave her a huge bear hug in reply. We continued in the hovercraft. So you come from heaven? I smiled at the interesting newcomer. He smiled back. I don't think you really know who I am. My mission is to visit the three-dimensional part of Agartha, temporarily, from the five-dimensional part. Our new inhabitants, yourself included, Tim, must be incorporated easily with our original inhabitants. You people in this hovercraft constitute newcomers, as there are great swathes of our continent you are not yet familiar with. The children will learn about it in school, but you must experience the country naturally. I have lived in and visited other dimensions before settling where I am. Telos is part of the area I am responsible for, though there are many others. There are plenty of wise masters here, but I am in charge of movement and organization for innovation. In Telos I have a physical body, but not in the other areas of Agartha. Now, let's get to know the outskirts of Telos. The hovercraft was coming down. A massive, round building caught our attention. There was a soft humming in the air, as if from 1,000 bumblebees. Turning around, we found a similar building behind us, and one to either side. We were ringed by massive, roofless buildings. A lot of manufacturing takes place here. Called Lex. We make food and drink in one of these buildings, furniture and interior products in another. These are businesses you have on the surface in a different form. The children might be interested in the sweets. Run through that green door there, Wendy and Pierre, and someone will look after you. The children didn't need to be told twice, they disappeared immediately through the green door. The rest of us, including Titch, were taken on a voyage of discovery we won't forget for a long time. Everything was made by hand or using very simple tools, not machines. There was a holy heap of stuff, implements of all kinds. When we emerged from the building, the children were waiting by the hovercraft, chewing and sucking, obviously pleased with themselves. We were incredibly impressed and surprised at the variety of things which could be produced without machinery. I have been an escapist all of my life, and have been seeking only the search itself, declared my petite grandmother as we sat down in our unique vehicle. I'm glad the search is over. This is where I want to grow old. You won't grow old here, you'll get younger, explained Saint Germain. Aging is an above-Earth process, and actually completely unnecessary. Look at Tim, he's been here for many Earth years, and still looks just as he did when he first came. This is how it will be with you, too. Much has been written of my youthful appearance, which never seemed to age. I live a wholesome life here, and know about youth and health. The children have to grow up first, but we can help Emily and the men to become younger. There are houses like the ones you see here, which offer various treatments for visitors who decide to stay. We continued our strange journey. 15. Magical buildings. It was lunchtime, or perhaps dinner time. As time didn't exist and the sun wasn't like the one on Earth, it was difficult to determine anything, except that our stomachs were rumbling. Lex took us into land in a village outside Telos, near a cafe. We sat down, and after making sure the hungry children had food, ordered some for us. How do we pay? I haven't seen anyone produce a wallet since we came. No notes, no coins. It was grandmother who pointed this out. Here payment is different, began Lex. Tien kind. Grandmother interrupted, eyes glittering with lurking laughter. Too old for that. Grandmother. I remonstrated. There's no money on Telos, just service. We provide for each other, exchange goods, and waste nothing. There are collection areas for exchange, instead of shops. It's well organized, as you will see. Grandmother was visibly enjoying a delicious cake. The children were cramming in everything on offer. Food is necessary for survival, Saint Germain smiled and said. It's provided in Agartha. On the surface, nothing is provided without payment, remarked Edmund. That kind of difference is like chalk and cheese. We continued our hovercraft journey into the unknown. Next time we landed, we were taken by surprise. We were on a mountainside, near an amazing building. It was more oval than round, and glittered with precious stones. It had a greenish glow, the Jade Temple, explained Saint Germain. It wasn't in any particular style, this temple. It was like a fairy tale castle with towers and pinnacles, more decorative afterthoughts than necessities. It was very beautiful. You have churches, he commented as we alighted. We have buildings for meditation. You can enjoy a moment of contemplation whenever you wish. Let's go in. We were so fascinated by the exterior of the temple that it was difficult to drag ourselves away to go inside. It was unlike anything we had seen before, glinting and gleaming as if alive. He've always been interested in UFOs, declared Edmund, who had previously said very little. This reminds me of an inverted UFO somehow. It's how you would imagine another planet, and yet we're still here on Earth. It's very weird. There are plenty of weird things here, observed Lex cheerfully, gesturing for us to enter the magnificent, jewel-studded door. The pearly gate, I thought, smiling. Inside was exquisite. The precious stones covering the walls cast a dull, shimmering gleam across the hall. There were plenty of comfortable couches and chairs upholstered in a velvet-like material. People were sitting, lost in meditation, or just resting, and we found our way to two sofas facing each other. The children realized they had to be calm and quiet, and seemed bewitched. They sat with their eyes closed and hands clasped. I knew these buildings were known as houses of God's love and were thousands of years old. There was something magical about them which words can't express. Music was playing softly and there was something aromatic which intensified the atmosphere, rather than otherwise. I shut my eyes and lost myself in it. It wasn't long before a man and woman were standing in the middle of the room. They talked to us telepathically. There were no voices, but they talked in turn, clearly in our heads. They both were tall and well built. The woman's hair was long and fair, the man's long and raven black. They were dressed in caftan-like robes with glittering edging and embroidery, the woman in pink and the man in green. "Welcome to the house of God's love," said the man in English, at least that's the language I heard. "In this haven of tranquility, your thoughts can cease their frantic dance and you can allow feelings and impressions to take over. It's time to look inwards at who you are. You may not be who you think you are," the clear female voice declared. "Be honest with yourselves. You children will find a story and sweets waiting behind the curtain. 99 over there." The children disappeared at once. The telepathic speech continued with the male voice. "You are newcomers, and very welcome. I want to explain some special attributes of the area of Mother Earth where you are now. If you still believe that the Earth is solid and you're dreaming, I can relieve you of your delusion. Both the North and South Poles converge in an enormous inner cavity with its own sun and beautiful surroundings, where people can live in great well-being with an ancient culture. Our capital city is Shambhala," the female voice took up the tale. "It's in the center of the planet. Our energy is free and inexhaustible. Our inhabitants travel by hovercraft, as you have done, because we wish to conserve nature and allow it to grow naturally. A tunnel system across the whole planet has formed a well-planned communications network for centuries. Energy comes from crystals hooked up to electromagnetism, which will last 500,000 years. The Earth's crust is approximately 800 miles, 1,300 kilometers, thick," the man continued. "The magnetic field of Earth has always been a mystery to scientists on the surface. Our inner sun in the center of the Earth is the mysterious power source which generates the magnetic field around our planet. Nowadays, there are entrances to Agartha across the whole planet," interrupted the woman, laughing. "We can stay in contact as long as you know we exist. We know you do, anyway. There was an entrance in the Library of Alexandria, which burned down in 47 BCE. There are millions of us here, but in the last 200 years we have only accepted 50 people from the surface." The man added, "You have visited our immense library, Portholagos, albeit somewhat briefly. It is actually under the Aegean Sea. It is enchanted, literally. It is the seat of learning, a world university, the stronghold of magic, a center for the arts and much, much more. A surface lifetime would not give you enough time to research all its secrets, but we live for hundreds of years, so we get more opportunity to study them. You're interested in our inhabitants, aren't you? The woman asked, and we nodded. We are similar to you, but taller. Good food and fine thoughts keep us youthful and extend our lives. We have been vegetarians for 12,000 years. This is good for our figures. We'll teach you. We are planning to come to the surface and offer help. The schedule is not definite yet, but your need grows more urgent. We already have informers up there. We could carry on for hours, observed the man. But we're not going to. We want you to experience our vast continent for yourselves, not by reading about it, or flying through it briefly. You ought to know in advance that Telos and its district are the only part where surface dwellers feel really at home. There are huge unexplored forests, fields, mountains, and seas that cover great parts of Agartha. You'll recognize much of the flora and fauna. We have many towns which are five-dimensional, which you have to learn before you can go there. You'll spend plenty of time in Porthalagos, and we'll travel around too. As the newest group from the surface, we would like you all to study Agartha together. We are honored that our respected friend and master, Saint Germain, is with you, and we will do all we can to ensure you have a comfortable journey. You can take the lift from here to Porthalagos, the woman informed us. Lex will show you the way. You'll need to take the children with you, as there is a kind of school where they can stay and learn while you explore Agartha. The practicalities of your trip are all arranged. What you learn from it is up to each of you individually. Will it be dangerous? My grandmother asked delicately. You may sometimes experience danger, but remaining positive and transmitting love and happiness will protect you. You may meet life forms that you don't recognize and elementals who know nothing of life on the surface. Fear is unacceptable. You must suppress your fear and even your anger, unless it is just. You'll see what I mean. The man nodded and smiled. We're only here to prepare you. Nobody can come and live here without being tested. We dare not take any risks with people from the surface. However, most people who don't fit in realize it themselves and decide not to stay. Tim is already one of us, but you could say that he's sanctioning his citizenship by accompanying Emily, Lex, and Edmund. The master travels where he wants, and you might need him. So there you are. Your new life starts now. 16. Shambhala, a paradise inside the earth. Our new life started with some time at home, as we earthlings still needed to sleep at night. The next morning, we met at my house to decide where we would go. We found that everything had been arranged, and all we had to do was to sit in the remote-controlled hovercraft. It was pre-programmed. And there was a big surprise. Manal knocked on my door early. I have your guide with me, he remarked. Tim, you know Telos well, but this guide knows the whole of Agartha. A grinning young woman appeared. It was Cizela. I hope you don't mind if I'm your guide. She smiled calmly and held out her hand, which I took. It felt like a butterfly wing in my earthly paw, and I shivered with happiness. Outside, the members of our small group had gathered. Grandmother hugged Cizela, who welcomed her. Edmund and Lex stared in surprise and delight. Cizela looked like a fairy tale princess, dressed in a long robe in shades of blue, with a wide, sparkling silver belt. Her long, silvery blonde hair was tied high on her head, with curling strands falling to her neck. She was preternaturally beautiful. T will explain each place in your own language, English. Please get into the hovercraft. What about the children? Exclaimed grandmother. They were taken asleep to the place in Porthalagos where they will stay. Rest assured, they will be fed and watered, and there will be no lack of games, songs, dancing, and stories for them. Titch, big and black, was calm at my side, his gaze on our fair guide. She laughed, bent down, and whispered in his ear, stroking him on the neck. He answered with a typical Titch sigh and licked her hand. Then he lay down, awaiting my command. There was room for all of us in the vehicle. It was comfortable, with cushioned seats and safety conveniences. Cizela sat next to grandmother, and I had to be content with Titch as my partner. We took off, gently and slowly at first, above the roofless houses, and then over a foaming sea, with the distant horizon as our only view. Grandmother and Cizela talked eagerly. 9, she said, in fluent. Together, while Titch and I slumbered. I only hope I didn't snore as loudly as he did. The distant horizon approached rapidly, and soon we could distinguish lush vegetation in a wide band across the strip of land we were passing. We came into land in the middle of all the greenery. Titch, still hazy with sleep, sat up and growled. He has a special growl, ending in a yelp, which I like to think is an expression of contentment. There were plenty of trees here, and he jumped out of the hovercraft in a kangaroo bound as soon as I released him from the safety harness. There are numerous groves of trees in this country which are landing places, Cecila told us. They all lead somewhere, so we're going to see where this one leads. She led us through the wood to a gate constructed from boughs and branches. It was amazingly lovely, and I wondered that we didn't make things like that on Earth. It was tall, and bent in various patterns, the green leaves still on some branches. The fence it was set in was in a similar style, and just as beautiful. Cecila opened the gate by pressing a rose in the pattern. Behind it was a lightly trodden path. We're beyond Telos now, announced our guide. You may not know that our country is studded with jewel towns, as their foundations are gold and precious stones. Down the ages, further back than you can imagine, we have mined and used the riches of the rocks. This humble path leads to our capital city, Shambhala. The place has played many roles in history. It is allegedly in the Gobi Desert, in another dimension, in heaven, and only a figment of your imagination. It's actually here, and in a moment you will see the real, genuine, and at least partly physical Shambhala. The dense forest and unassuming path disappeared. It was as if a massive curtain had been drawn from our eyes. A glittering, shimmering, sparkling town was laid out in front of us. Shambhala. The name itself caused shivers of delight and respect. Shambhala, exclaimed grandmother, with worship in her eyes. Where the streets are of gold, the houses of marble, and symphonies are playing. Where there are beautiful people clad in white, and there is the high seat of the great masters. Do you mean that we're really there? We are. Boomed Saint Germain's happy voice. He wasn't with us in the hovercraft, so I don't know where he came from. You'll soon see, Emily. I know this town well. Paris doesn't compare. He had hardly finished speaking when we felt firm ground beneath our feet. Grandmother's exclamation was no exaggeration, we were walking on a golden street. But our feet didn't touch the gold ingots. We hovered a little above them. Our steps became a smooth glide forward. We followed Cecila, having no idea where she would lead us. Each house we passed was a poem, a temple. I have never seen such beautiful buildings before. We were bathed in a lovely, silvery light. We stopped by a tall structure, more of an enchanted castle than a house. It was set slightly apart, surrounded by an incredible garden. Earthly eyes would hardly call this a town with houses, it was more like paradise. I thought I'd seen everything, declared Lex slowly, but this exceeds everything. Light, shimmering halls, singing, smiling people dressed in pale colors, wise men with halos, the interplay of colors on the walls, dancing children. And heavenly music in the background. What more can be said of the ineffable? Shambhala is no exaggeration. It is exactly how we dreamed the seat of peace and love to be. I thought Cecila took us away too quickly, but we had a glimpse of all that is the paradise of Shambhala, in its rightful place. It was partly earth-like and partly unearthly. There was something fragile about these people who were not as firmly fleshed as us. There were huge variations, and some were hardly human, except in form. Shambhala is a vast place, with many races and different types of beings. They all had one thing in common, love of the highest source and of others. The power of love flowed through this palace, filling our hearts with such happiness that it nearly hurt. I glanced at Cecila, and she returned my look. In that moment, the love between us, which had kept a discreet distance, finally came to the fore. She came to me, and I embraced her. She rested her head against my shoulder as grandmother turned and smiled. We were quiet for a long time. It was time to leave this amazing building. An oratorio from the 17th century resonated around us as we left the hall. Titch ran around wildly when we emerged. He had been quiet inside, lying at my feet. Now he careened around madly, with people laughing and shrieking as he bounded past them. We met other dogs, although weirdly enough, Titch didn't seem to see them. Usually, he liked to touch other dogs, but now it was as though they didn't exist. Are they ghost dogs? I asked, as a bunch of Dalmatians stopped to greet him. Titch walked right through the spotted dogs. That was the answer to my question. Some earthly dogs arrive here in non-physical form, Saint Germain told us. This place has 5 dimensions, and you can't expect normality here. Outside Telos, most of Agartha is 5-dimensional. If you don't mind, I will be narrator for a while. I'm going to recount the story of how I came here. I think it might interest our readers. My attention at this juncture was on our beautiful guide, so it was great that he took over. He was more used to an audience than me. 17. An exciting encounter with wild animals. I was in the place I usually stay when I'm not on Earth, Saint Germain said, when I was called to a higher place. It's time for Agartha to be revealed to humankind above Earth, one of the masters declared to me, and the task falls to you. Invisible or visible? I ventured to ask. He laughed. In this case, you have the pleasure of being either, as it suits you. You are to convey the secrets of Agartha to three-dimensional people who have just come and want to stay. They will change to 5 dimensions when they are ready. The whole Earth must change. Change has been needed for a long time when you consider the 21st century, I replied. Even earlier, when I think of the disasters invented in the elegant period I was part of. But now I'm here to help the surface Earthlings when these huge revolutionary changes come into force on the Earth. Are you looking forward to the Great Light? Wondered Emily. Or have you already been there? Not in the way you're thinking. Saint Germain smiled. I have too much left of our beloved Earth in me, so I'm used as an intermediary between various dimensions and times. But now we have to move on. We're going to visit the Great Chasm. Nature without parallel. It was good to have Saint Germain with us. I wasn't worried about dangerous adventures or hostile peoples, as the concept of hostile didn't exist here. But I was on my own voyage of exploration, Cizela. It was time for me to settle down in this corner of the world and find my life partner. I had done this, but I needed to know that she agreed. Maybe this was a starting point, not a tourist trip. Cizela turned as if she'd heard my thoughts and smiled in a way that gave me great hope. Grandmother caught our smiles and looked away. The Great Chasm really was gigantic. We struggled out of the hovercraft and stood dumbfounded. It was just as well there was a fence to stop us from rushing forward. How far back it went, or how deep it was, I have no idea, but Cizela took over. The fence was iron, wrought in a strange pattern, with a gate. Cizela stood before it. In the Great Chasm lives a people who are completely unknown to you. They have been here since the dawn of time, and will probably remain forever. They are giants from ancient times and can be 13 to 16 feet, 4 to 5 meters, tall, and are heavily built. To modern eyes, they wear strange skins almost like Vikings. But they are not warriors. They work as we do, with positive energies, love, happiness, dance, and music. Unfortunately, they are extremely shy and dislike visitors. The Great Chasm is a kingdom in its own right. They have their own culture, and are not influenced by others who live here. A path runs down the chasm and a tunnel leads into their kingdom. Inside are the same sky and heavenly bodies that we have. They share our sun and their air is as pure as ours. They are farmers. A point of interest is that they have dairy cattle on their farms. These are similar to the cows you have on the surface, but bigger and a different color. While she was talking, a long, dark shadow appeared in the entrance to the chasm. Cizela waved it away and it departed. What a shame, sighed grandmother. I would have liked to meet them. It probably wouldn't do any good, said Cizela, smiling. They can be unintentionally menacing. They scare off intruders. Now we need to continue our journey, but let's eat first. There's a food machine under the trees over there. We'll take a well-deserved break for a short while. The master, Saint Germain, bowed elegantly to grandmother and showed her to a table with roots in the ground and tree stumps as seating. In the Great Chasm, Titch had been nervous. It was as though he sniffed out danger, at least for dogs. He sat close to my legs, and I shared the delicious vegetarian food with him. Cizela, who knew what she was doing, brought us each a different dish. There were spices and salt. The food tasted incredibly good, and a cook on Earth would probably not have been able to produce anything similar. It was served attractively, like a work of art. I'm looking forward to the next stop, I thought. I was not to be disappointed. Saint Germain vanished while we were eating. He probably didn't need food. He was called to another dimension and will return as soon as possible. Cizela explained. We hurried with our food and stepped back into our trusty vehicle. Next stop was on the edge of a jungle. I knew this because I had seen jungles many times on television when I lived on Earth. I had always wanted to see a real one. But where were we? As if she had heard, Cizela cried, we are right under an African jungle, the Congo, to be exact. The jungle here is like the one above Earth, but the animals aren't dangerous unless threatened. They have no experience of guns or arrows. The wickedness wreaked on Earth's wild animals is invented and caused by people. Animals eating animals is natural and part of the food chain. Here you can walk unharmed if you show no fear. An animal will only threaten if it senses fear. Keep calm, and there is no danger. Let's walk in single file. I'll lead, as I'm used to animals. She headed off along a narrow path, indicating for us to follow. Edmund stopped suddenly. They had enough of jungles, he remarked, unbuttoning his shirt and pulling out his arm. A bright red scar stretched up the length of his left arm and shoulder, coming dangerously close to his heart. I got too close to a tiger, he continued. I only survived because my friends behind managed to scare it off before it killed me. One of my friends was a skillful doctor, and there was surgical equipment at one of the tourist centers, so he disinfected the tear and sewed it up straight away. Jungles hold no attraction for me. You've no need to be scared here, Cecila said gently. I guarantee your safety. You can't stay here, as we'll come out elsewhere. The Congo is not much like the jungle here in Agartha. Animals will not attack unprovoked here. Tim will walk with you and then you'll feel safe. I can tell you some funny anecdotes, I declared with a smile. Not about dangerous animals, but about dangerous women. Everyone laughed, and we continued into the jungle. Look at this, said Lex. Look at these amazing flowers climbing around the trees. They must be some kind of orchid. His calm voice kept us informed about the vegetation in the jungle, as he had been here before. Suddenly, all this luxuriant foliage opened out into a meadow. I'm going to ask you to sit on the ground a moment, in a ring, Cecila instructed us. Set aside fear, as we are here to meet animals, and this is a test for your Agarthan residence permits. We send cowards home. Shut your eyes, and don't open them again before I blow my whistle. We sat in a ring on the emerald grass among the sweetly scented flowers, the bumblebees and the butterflies. The grass wasn't as tall as meadow grass, and the flowers were close to the ground. Shutting our eyes made us aware of the heavenly smells wafting around, bringing peace and calm. Then Cecila blew the whistle, and we opened our eyes. Animals were creeping out of the darkness of the trees. There were lions, tigers, elephants, monkeys both big and small, zebras, giraffes, and brown bears. Cecila was piping caressing melodies, and the animals were as if enchanted. Edmund was next to me, and Titch wriggled between us, resting his head on his great paws. He watched everything with quivering nostrils, but was quiet as I had instructed. The row of animals grew. Edmund seized the sleeve of my shirt and held it firmly. He was pale. The animals stopped in front of Cecila, lowering their heads, and she scratched an ear or a nose. It was a hypnotic moment. I was convinced we were all hypnotized, because this couldn't happen. The animals passed by us singly and in troops, with the pungent smell of wild animal nearly suffocating at times. Cecila set aside the whistle and put her hands to her mouth. The peculiar noise she produced had an instant effect on our visitors. They dispersed at once, running for the forest. You can rest assured, called our guide, that nothing would happen if you met these animals alone. They have learned to respect us as we respect them. This is our last visit for today, and we can carry on tomorrow if you like. Edmund let go of my shirt with a sigh of relief. He had been overwhelmed by the sight of the animals. He climbed swiftly into the nearby hovercraft. We followed. Grandmother stooped to pick a flower, but Cecila stopped her. You see, our guide observed gently, we're not allowed to pick the flowers. Only the growers can take what they need. When you pick a flower, you interfere with the floral group soul, creating a gap for all eternity. It can't be repaired. Flowers which know they will be picked for their smell, spice, or edibility give themselves up bravely, praying for help and forgiveness for the pickers. Everything here is alive, even if it's produced by people. That's one of the secrets of a holistic lifestyle, which is the norm here. It's a system of living imagery. How interesting, said my grandmother, smiling. I won't pick the flowers, I promise. We have to learn the rules if we're going to live here. Titch and I climbed into our transport. Lex was already sitting with grandmother. We took off. 18. The Love Union. The hovercraft landed near our homes. Cecila went into grandmother's house. I had kissed Cecila briefly when we left the meadow after meeting the animals. There had been plenty of trees to conceal us. Grandmother had given us a knowing look and couldn't hide a smile of delight. I wondered how to go about courting a girl on this side of the planet. I knew Cecila was the person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, which looked like it would be a very long time indeed. I wanted children with her, and the opportunity of watching them grow up in this enchanted place. I admit that things had gone very quickly, but time was a different concept here. We went into grandmother's house and sat on her comfortable sofa. While grandmother went into what she called the kitchen to make tea, I took Cecila's hands and gazed deep into her eyes. "Will you be my wife?" I asked. I had no idea what weddings were like in this part of the world, but Cecila laughed, leaned across and kissed my cheek, and answered by singing out yes while dancing some graceful steps. I got up and danced with her until grandmother came with the tea tray. "Grandmother Emily, we're going to get married," I called out happily. "Cecila has agreed, and now we have to draw up some plans. Let's make it a double wedding," laughed grandmother. "I've just accepted Lex to be my husband today." Cecila looked at us in bewilderment. "Double wedding, getting married?" she asked. "To be your wife, Tim, and there's a ceremony for that? Is Emily going to be a wife too?" "Lex is. What happens on the surface?" Grandmother, her eyes shining with tears, she was always emotional, explained about clothes and a church wedding. She mentioned the vicar and exchanging rings. Cecila listened, round-eyed. "That's not how we do it," she observed quietly. "You'll see how we do it. You are welcome to our love union, which will take place tomorrow evening, if that's all right with you, Tim." I nodded in the sweet knowledge that I was about to be married to the loveliest girl in the world. I really didn't care about the details. The day ran away just like they do on the surface, even if it was only a feeling of passing time. When Cecila had gone home, there was a knock on my door. It was Manel, and I was really glad to see him. I wanted to tell him about my coming marriage and ask him what it would be like. "It's not quite like an earthly wedding," he laughed, thumping me on the back. "It's just a love union where both sides decide to continue their lives together. A teacher blesses the union. We don't have divorce, but if one partner should die, then the union is broken. You can only have second thoughts before the union takes place. We don't have vicars, just a symbolic union of body and soul. You will both be wearing white. We don't use tiaras and veils, the clothes don't matter as long as they are white. On these occasions, we wear white cloaks to represent the unwritten pages of the future. The couple can be alone or surrounded by relatives and friends. Everyone likes to come, so the bridal couple is rarely alone. In Portholagos, we have special bridal suites. Most people get married there. There will be plenty of onlookers, as by invitation only doesn't exist here. The reception afterwards goes on until all hours, and there is food and drink everywhere." "It sounds exciting," I answered. "What shall we do about rings?" "You can give each other jewelry." "I can help you with that. Women quite often like some kind of token. Otherwise, there is nothing else to distinguish marriage. This evening is your last as a bachelor. You should go home and get a good night's sleep. It's important that you know in your own mind you won't have any regrets. There's an entrance, but no exit," I joked. "I can tell you now, I'm 100% sure." Manal said, "I'm really here because Arniel needs you in the town hall. He wants to discuss your future work." "We'll do it later. Pi, go and tell him the glad tidings. Now you're really one of us." He thumped me on the back. "Cecila was born here and doesn't know much about the world outside. Our people are one entity, under the flag of unity. The circle represents unity and is a much-used symbol. You'll return tomorrow when I found some circle jewelry for you and your bride. Emily needs to know this, too," I called. "She's going to marry Lex, preferably at the same time as us." "Will that be all right?" "That will be completely wonderful," Manal replied. "But they need to know the traditions. I can help them, because Lex won't know everything yet." I sighed with relief as my fair friend shut the door behind him. It was great he was around to help. I needed to sleep a few hours before dawn, which arrives invisibly here. In the end, I slept like a baby, and didn't wake up until a panting Titch placed his paws on my stomach and licked me in the face. A rude awakening. Behind him was Manal, holding something white. It turned out to be my wedding clothes. The clothes didn't include tails or a dinner jacket. They were soft trousers and a baggy jacket, with an ankle-length cloak. This last had richly decorated shoulder ornaments attached. "There we go." Manal cocked his head to one side and surveyed me with a critical eye. Then he put a sparkling band of white around Titch's black neck, which didn't seem to bother my dog in the least. He yawned, and stared amiably at Manal, who was holding exquisitely beautiful jewels in his hands. It was a necklace with a pendant that glittered with diamonds. Diamonds were commonplace here and beautiful. The pendant was heart-shaped, with a ruby in the center, and artwork by a goldsmith. Love unions take place in the mornings here, Manal continued, as early as possible. Your grandmother and her husband-to-be are ready, and your bride is waiting impatiently in the bridal suite. I followed Manal rapidly outside to the waiting hovercraft. We landed at an entrance to Porthalagos, and Manal led us upstairs and downstairs, along winding corridors, and through temple halls and lovely inside gardens. Soft music accompanied us everywhere. We stopped at the gate to one of the gardens. It was decorated with images of butterflies and roses. We were approaching a raised area swathed in flowers. Cecila was there, radiating such beauty that my stomach tied itself in knots and I gasped for breath. Like me, she was in white, but her white, ankle-length dress glinted like moonbeams and her amazing hairstyle was crowned with diamonds. My gift glittered on her breast, and she was holding a chain with a similar heart on it. She put this around my neck and took my hand. At our side were grandmother and her bridegroom, both in white. I nearly didn't recognize my grandmother. She was so attractive with her long, white hair, rosy cheeks, and tears of happiness brimming in her cornflower eyes. Lex was handsome, more Indian-like than ever, with his clear-cut profile and tanned complexion. Master Arniel appeared suddenly from the shadows. He smiled at the four of us. Then he came to each of us and placed his hands on our brows. Afterwards, he beckoned Cecila and me to the pillared podium. "Hug your wife," he commanded, and we stood close, embracing, while wonderful music played and time stood still. It was as though an incredible force closed around us and everything else vanished. We were one, wholly united, as if we lived in each other and were each other. It was a magical moment, and lasted for ages. I couldn't say how long, it felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes in our time. The music ended and Arniel gestured for us to leave the podium. Grandmother and Lex rose to get up. In the garden were 4 flowery chairs where we sat and surveyed the scene we had just experienced. We were still holding hands and exchanging looks of love. Grandmother and Lex joined us for about half an hour, I think, with Arniel close by. "Now you are joined in matrimony, as you say on the surface," declared Arniel. "We don't consider words necessary for this ceremony. Now you may do as you please. You may go home, as I guarantee there'll be a crowd outside waiting to congratulate you. Here they are now." He hardly had time to complete his sentence before the garden filled with people and elementals who I glimpsed briefly as a glow. Arniel saw my confusion and laid a hand on my shoulder. "Some of Cecila's relatives and friends are 5-dimensional, he told me. "They may be indistinct, but are devoted for all that." We were fairly overwhelmed by wedding guests, if I can call them that. They were all gate crashers. The only person invited was Edmund, who came with Wendy and Pierre. A dance started up, and delightful singing, which whirled faster and faster, submerging our thoughts and senses. The place pulsed with rhythm, tempestuous dance, and joyful, stirring music. I was glad when Saint Germain appeared from nowhere and hugged us. "We'll meet again soon," he said. "I'm releasing Cecila from guide duties tomorrow, as she's a newlywed. I'll take over." Someone must have been holding Titch during the wedding ceremony. Because now he pushed through the crush of bodies and came to my side, his head held high with intense vigilance. The diamond collar glittered on his black neck, and people withdrew to a safe distance. "I want to go home," I whispered to my new wife. She nodded, eyes sparkling. She took my hand and Titch's collar, and hey presto, everything vanished. We were at home, and everything vanished. We were at home, and Titch retired to bed. 19. Back to normality and tourists in Agartha. The day dawned sunny and summery, with birdsong and the scent of flowers, warm ground, and trees. My wife and I were sitting in the arbor when Manal turned up. "The holiday is over," he cried out. "It's time to get back to work." We sighed and climbed into the waiting hovercraft. "There are newcomers who need to know about this part of the planet," Manal explained. "We need Cecila to give a short introduction on Telos, as they won't get further than that. They came through Mount Shasta, but they don't really believe they're awake yet. They think they're dreaming. They have to wake up sometime." The tourists were waiting in the meadow near the entrance to Porthalagos. Grandmother, Lex, and Titch were among them, so I joined them because I still wanted to know more about Agartha, which I was now attached to for eternity. People were sitting on the grass, excited and expectant. Manal was among them, smiling and talking, probably in an attempt to calm them down as they didn't know where they were. I thought about coming here by accident to my mind, and imagined they had all had a similar experience. There were about 20 adults, but no children other than Wendy and Pierre. Cecil was utterly charming. It was as though my wife projected a supernatural beam into each of us. "Welcome," she called. "If you are wondering where in the world you are, I'm about to inform you. This town is Telos, and it is in the subterranean part of the earth, the existence of which you have not yet acknowledged. You only recognize 7 continents: Africa, Asia, Europe, North America, South America, Oceania, and Antarctica. According to you, this continent inside the earth does not exist. But I'm telling you it does, even physically, for the 3-dimensional people here. Telos is the largest town, apart from the capital, which is called Shambhala. None of our towns here are like your noisy cities, where evil lurks around every corner. This is the kingdom of eternal peace which you pine for with nostalgia on the surface." Yes, nostalgia. Originally, we Agarthans are from the surface, just like you. There are books about us, but they are not bestsellers. You imagine a hollow earth country to be gray and dangerous. But it's not like that, as you can see. As far as technology is concerned, we are light years ahead of you surface dwellers. We hope to share our knowledge with you in the future. That future is closer than you think. The network of Agartha embraces 120 underground towns. The inhabitants of these towns are descended from the advanced civilizations of Atlantis and Lemuria. I'm sure you are wondering, how can we have our own sun here providing good weather and verdant foliage? The Earth's crust is approximately 800 miles, 300 kilometers, thick. The planet isn't solid, so the center of gravity isn't in the center of the Earth, but in the Earth's crust, about 400 miles, 650 kilometers, underground. The source of the Earth's magnetism has long been a mystery. The inner sun in the center of the Earth is the mysterious source of Earth's magnetism. It shines upon us here. There was an inventor at the end of the 19th century called Nikola Tesla. At that time, there were many entrances into the Earth's hollow interior. Tesla discovered that electricity could be harnessed in unlimited quantities to power all machinery without the need for coal, oil, gas, or any other environmental pollutant. He placed this technology in the public domain, and people began to abuse entry to the Earth's interior, so that we had to seal off many portals, and they remain sealed. Tesla himself vanished, and actually he is here, but less physical than you these days. Many million Catharians live here in the hollow Earth. Catharians also live on Jupiter. I'm telling you this because the Catharians are a strange people. They are incredibly tall, even in their stocking feet. More than 36,000 people from the surface live here now. In the last 200 years, about 50 people have arrived from the surface, but in the last 20 years, 8 people have moved here permanently. Some of the newcomers are with us now, and other visitors are arriving, like you today. We have an enormous library called Portholagos. It contains documents from the entire universe. It is under the Aegean Sea, between Greece and Turkey, but nowadays no longer has a direct link with the surface. We call it a library, although it doesn't contain many books. We have historical stories related dramatically. It's like theater, but more so. There is much more in Portholagos which we will show you, in part at least. Within Agartha, no passports or papers are needed. We have airports inside the Earth, which lead to openings, concealed from your eyes, the North and South Poles. We travel in an environmentally friendly way, using existing highways and the universal laws of energy. Our technology is so much in advance of yours that we can't get lost or have an accident. You may have invented the wheel, but you haven't gone much further. All our energy is free. You could use this same energy, and we are planning to teach you how it works. You have abused technology, using it to build weapons. These are destructive, not only for the intended target, but also for the animal kingdom and elementals. Emily put up her hand and called out, "Cecila, please tell us more about living here. We need to know, now that we've come to live in Telos." Cecila continued, "First and foremost, we don't like destroying the ground which you surface dwellers walk on. We want grass and flowers to grow without being trampled on. That's why we have learned to hover, which you will also learn if you stay here. Hovercrafts do it, and we do too. This lawn is made especially for heavy surface dwellers like you, but there aren't many places like this. We are taller than you in comparison, but lighter because of the food we eat." Emily wanted to know about our home life. Of course we have one. We build the round, roofless houses you've already seen. A round room never gets dusty, as there are no corners. Energy moves freely in a circular room. When a speck of dust flies into a room, it is removed on a wave of energy. It has the same effect as a vacuum cleaner, without the bag. This is practical, to say the least. We are incredibly rich because we have precious stones and metals in abundance. Our homes are luminous. Externally, there is privacy. Inside, we have a 360-degree view. On the surface, you are locked in dark rooms while we can see not only outside our homes, but right up to the stars. Our field of vision is unimpeded. Apart from our houses, there are no shopping centers, no blocks of flats, no motorways. What do you do about food? Someone called. Are you all vegetarians? Cecila grinned. You bet. She replied. No animals are killed here for food. We eat fruit, vegetables, seeds, and grains. There is no life force in what we call dead food, by which we mean meat, fowl, and fish. There are distribution centers where we can obtain food for each day. Some of us get food from the universal source, which only requires concentration. A working day lasts 4 hours, which gives us time to spare and time to take our health and diet into consideration. We live harmoniously, without hurry or stress. Nothing is wasted, we have advanced methods of recycling. We eat only locally produced food, and don't add chemicals to it. A vegetarian diet has slowed and finally stopped the aging process, and we have achieved what you call immortality. We have full control of our aging and can lengthen our lives as we wish. What a lovely life, sighed grandmother, and Minnie burst out laughing. They probably couldn't believe it, and would be unable to follow this regime. What about clothes? Called a very elegant lady. Cecila laughed and spread out the skirt of her long dress, which was fastened with a sparkling belt. How about this? She asked. Our fashion may be considered uncomfortable and boring by earthlings. Of course, we have a choice of materials and tailors, but not in the same way as you. The latest Paris fashion doesn't enter into it. We like soft, wearable clothes in beautiful colors. We use capes outdoors if necessary. We know you wear jeans, shirts, and jumpers, but we only wear those if we are visiting the surface. I think we are clothes conscious and wear imaginative clothing, but maybe you don't agree. The elegant lady giggled, but didn't reply. She looked horrified when Cecila added, My dear, we produce things by thought in this part of the world. We create by thinking. She was quiet, and shut her eyes a moment. With a wave of her hand, she produced a wonderful bouquet of flowers. Everyone screamed and probably thought it was sorcery. I didn't like the atmosphere at this juncture. I went and put my arm around my wife's shoulder. Then I looked at the elegant lady, who seemed to have turned to stone, an ugly look on her face. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, you are here to learn about this part of the planet. My wife has told you a great deal. She is no enchantress. Anyone can learn direct creation by the power of thought, but you need quiet and patience. It doesn't involve magic, sorcery, or witchcraft. It involves knowledge. Knowledge on the surface hasn't developed to the extent which we Agrans take for granted. Here everyone is a magician, to use layman's terms. I suggest that those who can't accept our culture leave our inner earth and return to the rat race on the surface. You ought not enter Porthalagos, because it presents even greater challenges. I took the bouquet which Cecila was still holding and threw it out into the audience. There was a moment of silence, and then applause. But the elegant lady stood up without glancing in our direction, and vanished into a waiting hovercraft. Most of the rest of us entered the amazing, shimmering library known as Porthalagos. A few of the visitors remained outside, discussing what they had just heard. They simply didn't dare enter. No one on the surface would ever believe the stories they could tell, so maybe they should just return and keep quiet about the mysterious land they had visited. We wandered around the lovely, immense building, watching holographic images of the past and future. It is difficult to describe Porthalagos. It really has to be experienced firsthand. It's a weird mixture of the physical, the psychic, facts, and entertainment. For people on the surface, the past is available in fairly reliable books, but the future is yet unwritten. Here, the past and the future are accessible to everyone. You can play with time as you choose, or go beyond time. In this context, things may seem scary and unfathomable, but when you are here, it becomes completely natural. We were resting, catching our breath in one of the common rooms. Edmund, sitting beside me and my wife, asked, There's something we've avoided talking about, and that's illness. Is there a hospital here and doctors? How does the health system work? Do you not get ill? Oh yes, there is illness, replied Cecila, but not much. We break arms and legs, and have problems with internal organs. We're just human, you know. But we have healers to help with illness and accidents. If you lose a limb, you can get a new one? We exchange worn-out body organs for new ones. There are as many skillful healers as there are problems. You can't lose or maim a limb in your etheric blueprint, so from this eternal blueprint, we can restore any lost or maimed physical body parts. What about mental health if you're in need of a shrink? Asked a young man with fine, dark hair, which he shook continuously. I laughed. We're all shrinks, I pointed out. We have many wise men and women who help when necessary. They have endless patience and the ability to guide us through problems. I remembered how dreadful I had felt after the shipwreck, and what a short time it took to get back to normal. I mostly had my friend Manol to thank for that. There aren't any televisions, telephones, or radios, a very young man called out. How do you communicate with each other? Cecilia's laughter rang out. We use our brains and thoughts. She answered. We accomplish all we need with the power of thought. You haven't really figured out how it works up there on the surface, Valencio, my dear. The young man looked harassed. How do you know my name? He snapped. In Italy, where I come from, we Catholics don't allow any mumbo-jumbo. The Pope, my father, wants us to keep to the Holy Scripture. The Pope is your father? I asked, flummoxed. Do you mention that in Italy? You must have been a sin of his youth, surely? I don't think so, Valencio replied calmly. That's why I'm traveling. I found out about Agartha from one of the high priests, Cardinal Riemfort. He's French, and has always been kind to me. I know what goes on behind the scenes at the Vatican. That's why they're looking for me now. I'm a wanted man. I've always longed to be anywhere apart from where I grew up. I think I'd like to stay here. What religion do you believe in? You do have a religion. Tourists are allowed to stay for 2 days, I commented. I relented when I saw the look of disappointment on the boy's face. I can ask, if you really want to stay longer. You have to ask my wife about religion? Cecilia gestured to the boy to sit, and he sat down at her feet. I was brought up in a monastery, he said. We were treated cruelly and beaten with a stick. When I finished school, I was forced to live at the Vatican as a kind of novice. My relationship to the Pope was completely hushed up. My father pretended not to recognize me, even though sometimes I had to serve him. He never looked me in the eye. The only friend I had was Cardinal Riemfort, and he taught me much more than Greek and Latin. Otherwise I was regarded as a thug, although I tried to be as observant as possible. My attentiveness meant that I noticed much that was taboo. I can tell you more of this later. Riemfort told me the earth was hollow and that you could get here by sea, or via Mount Shasta. I ran away. I stole some money that was lying around and took a plane to South America. It was easy. Now I'm wanted for stealing, although I consider the money mine by right, as I was never given a penny, while the old men in the Vatican drank and ate well and were sensuous in the bargain. He paused for breath, and I interrupted. Valencio, I said. Thank you for being so honest. You should really be locked up, but we don't do that here. P11 Speak to the powers that be and see what they say. Until then, you can live with Edmund, who has 2 scamps you can help look after. Edmund had listened to this confession in its entirety and couldn't help laughing. The Vatican, oh my goodness, the Vatican. He chuckled, slapping his thighs. He can certainly live with us, there's plenty of room. He can't steal money here, but maybe he should send some precious stones to His Holiness the Pope when he has earned some, with a politely respectful, affectionate letter. Valencio looked confused, but then giggled too. I try to look strict, but it's not one of my strong points. How old are you? I asked the boy. 19, soon 20, was the reply. Please don't return me to the surface. The Vatican has spies everywhere, and I'll be taken into custody at Mount Shasta. Cardinal Riemfort will guess where I am, although he won't tell. He's the only one of them who has a decent heart. Politics and religion, exclaimed my new grandfather Lex. My dear Cecilia, what are your views on these important subjects? My wife's smile froze on her face. It was obvious that these subjects were not dear to her heart. Actually, Lex, my dear, we don't really get involved, she replied. Throughout Agartha, we have only one religion, our belief in the eternal source, the dwelling place of love. There aren't any dissenters or free thinkers. We are all one in this love. We call our belief the faith of light. Everything is one in love. Yes, but who is in control here? Somebody or some group must govern the country. It was Edmund's turn to ask, and Valencio's face reflected wonder and anxiety. Of course, I replied. We are governed by a council of 12 masters. 12 is the magic number for endings. That's why Mayan culture has predicted changes to the Earth in 2012. I know, but you aren't allowed to mention that in the Vatican, retorted Valencio. I have my own religion in my mind. My father is in heaven, as he doesn't acknowledge my existence on Earth, hope that he is. I realized the sense of bitterness this young man felt towards his father and his tough upbringing. Is your mother alive? I asked. No, Valencio replied, and I could see he was fighting back tears. A man isn't allowed to cry was still part of his worldview, formed by rigid monks in secret, where a strict God judged the human heart. My mother died a few months after my birth, the dark-haired boy continued. I don't think she died of natural causes. They said she died of complications after giving birth, in an effort to blame me. Cardinal Riemford helped relieve my conscience. My mother was the daughter of a rich, respected nobleman who owned large estates in southeast Italy, near the Pope's childhood home. She was disowned and cast out by her parents, who looked upon me as a bastard with no right to live. I probably would have been killed if Cardinal Riemford hadn't argued my case, and I was taken in by thick-skinned monks instead. That's my life history. I would like to stay here. The monks taught me well, astronomy, geology, advanced mathematics, French, English, and Latin, of course. Might I be of some use? We'll see what we can do, answered Cecilia gently, giving the boy a lovely smile. Any more questions before we split up? Are there taxes here, or don't you use money at all? How do you pay for things when you buy food, clothes, or houses? Or are you just allocated these things? Doesn't anybody earn a wage? My inquisitive grandmother was on the case again. Not in the same way as on the surface, grandmother, I replied. We exchange goods, and there are centers for goods everywhere. We take only what we need, and return things when we have finished using them. We swap with each other. We make things ourselves. The 4-hour working day is very intense, and if we can't organize something, there is always someone else to help with planning, or whatever. We don't buy, we share. What about law and order, then? Are there police, lawyers, and judiciary? These questions came from Lex. We have laws, yes, I answered. The legal system is ancient. There has been democracy here since the beginning of time. Agartha's network is responsible for our safety underground. Cases that arise and need solutions are considered individually and judged in God's light and the holy code of justice. Our long lives provide experience and wisdom. There aren't many difficult cases here. Many of the ancients here lived on the surface originally, and know how to differentiate between good and bad. I think we should sleep on this until a new day brings us new energy. Edmund called out, with 2 slumbering children at his side. Titch gave a short bark and raised his enormous weight, looking inquiringly at me and Cecilia. Valencio went with Edmund and the children. A small fleet of hovercraft waited patiently in the rose-colored light which came at the end of the bright golden day, bringing promise of the heavenly cradle of sleep. 20. The purpose of pets. We were awakened by Titch's indiscreet scratching and panting. It was time for the next stage in discovering the culture of this remarkable land. I suddenly thought of something at breakfast, and I was devastated. Cecilia. What about your parents? I asked suddenly, seizing her hands, which had been busy crumbling her bread. What about them? She asked, putting some bread into her mouth. I've always presumed they were dead, I said. You've never talked about them. We should have invited them to our love union if they're alive. Do you have any siblings? We've actually forgotten to talk about these things, replied my wife. My parents live in the 5th dimension, a long way away. They know of our union and gave their approval. So far, you can only see 3 dimensions, so you wouldn't have noticed if they had come. I have a sister and a brother. They are also 5-dimensional, but you can meet them all when you're ready. I crossed the boundary when I lived in Telos for a while. It's not the first time I've been 3-dimensional, as I love Earthlings and want to help educate them. Now I'm married to one, although you will also become 5-dimensional. Now I really don't understand, I sighed. If you were 5-dimensional, I wouldn't be able to see you. I know there are both kinds in Telos. And you know that 5-dimensional beings have the capacity to transform themselves when they want, interrupted my wife. But if we have children, I stammered. What would happen to them? Would they be a mixture? Cecilia's peal of laughter removed my anxiety. You've got a lot to learn, she hooted. The things you don't understand yet. She got up from the table and danced into the garden with me following. Manal was there. I was just about to visit you turtle doves, he said, smiling. Arniel wants to see you, remember, Tim. I was a bit embarrassed that I'd forgotten. Manal apologized to Cecila for leaving her alone on this beautiful morning, and then I was off in his hovercraft, wondering if I would learn anything exciting, like how to become five-dimensional. Not yet, Manal said, obviously reading my thoughts. It's not far off, but you have some work to put in first. That stuff about dimensions I started to say is very complicated. My friend finished the sentence. Here we are. I jumped down. Titch had volunteered to stay with Cecila. He loved her and the garden, and she liked playing with him. Like many other buildings, the one before us now was inlaid with jewels. The interior glittered with gold and other precious metals in ingenious patterns. Arniel was sitting in a comfortable armchair, gesturing for us to sit down. Now you're a serious member of Agvan society, Tim. He smiled. You have married the daughter of original inhabitants. This makes us happy, and we offer our congratulations. But there is a genetic disparity in that Cecila has more genes than you. Now you're married to a native, we'll have to transfer some more to you. At the same time, we want you as our special envoy to interact with the surface. It's possible to do both. We need people like you on the surface. Things may be different now you have a family, which may well grow. You need to learn more telepathy and many other magic tricks, as you like to call them. We have put this off until you are really one of us. Manal will come for you every day, and lessons will take place in a variety of locations, starting tomorrow. That is my message. I was pleased with this, and so was Cecila. It was a four-way celebration, as grandmother and Lex threw an Earth-style party for us. Even my little Titch was invited. He always knew something special was going on when he wore his wide red collar with gold studs and a rosette. So far, we hadn't met any pet dogs. I wondered why and decided to find out more about pets in this world. There's no real difference between morning and evening in Agartha. The sun always shines. We decide ourselves how we want to divide up the day, and we sleep when we need to. Many people keep regular hours, just as on Earth. As we trotted over to grandmother and Lex's, we decided it was evening. Actually, we hovered across, our feet carefully above the ground. We learned how to do this, and it's not as weird as it sounds. In this way, we didn't destroy any plants. My grandmother had set out a Swedish smorgasbord, as far as possible. Swedes love their smorgasbord and like to indulge, even abroad. Grandmother still had some treats she had brought with her, like crisp bread, ginger thins, and dried meat. All we needed was schnapps and beer, but instead we had wine from Tello's. Manal was invited too, and seemed somewhat confused to see the groaning table. He kept to the vegetables from Tello's. Titch was given a meaty bone and danced around in delight. I'm going to take this opportunity to ask a question, I said, as we were sitting outside among trailing flowers and leaves. Grapes grew like a roof over us, and the scents from the warm ground were almost overwhelming. Do people keep dogs here, or are they considered unclean, like in Oriental countries on the surface? Don't worry. Manal smiled. There are all kinds of pets here. But we don't walk them like you do. We always have a purpose if we're walking, and it may be difficult to take a pet along. We use cats and dogs therapeutically when necessary. Don't you up there, he lifted his hand to point at the roof of grapes, realize the healing properties of cats, dogs, and horses? There aren't any healers here who don't use them in their treatment. It's important to keep the animals clean and cultivate their intelligence properly. They're not allowed to run around willy-nilly. Does that answer your question? I stroked Titch as he sniffed my arm, which obviously smelled interesting. What a shame he hasn't learned that, I commented. Manal's smile widened. Titch is going to learn all about it. He's coming on our field trip tomorrow. He'll be learning at the same time as you. That sounded great, if mysterious. I was being educated with my dog. That was a slightly mad thought. 21. Lessons begin. So what happened to Valencio? He came to grandmother's party. We had quite a good chat about his escape, his misgivings, hopes, and great sadness that his father didn't care for him. He regarded himself as an orphan and wanted to stay with us. Manal promised to ask the Galactic Council if they could give him a home in Agartha, or another planet. In the meantime, he lived with Edmund and the children, where he was very popular. It seemed that Cecil knew more about the lessons Manal would provide than I had supposed. When I expressed concern at leaving her so soon after our love union, she consoled me that it wouldn't be for long. Many lessons could take place at home, and she would be there too. Apart from that, she had her own daily chores, and I had to remember that no one worked longer than 4 hours each day in Agartha. After that, your time was your own. It was strange how all tasks seemed to fit into the allotted time. This could be achieved on Earth, too, if people were more disciplined. Manal arrived punctually the next morning. I had come to rely upon this tall, slim man with his long, blonde hair and friendly demeanor. I felt totally secure with him. Titch did too, and showed his enthusiasm as we got into the hovercraft. He wagged his tail constantly and tried to push between Manal and me, not easy in such a small space. The hovercraft stopped in the countryside outside Telos. As I stepped out, I could see a farmer working in a wheat field. We walked over to him. He was carrying a seed bin on his shoulders and sowing the seed by hand. I was surprised, as I knew how easy this would be with a tractor on the surface. Suddenly, a host of nature spirits appeared, elementals as tall as humans, yet so fragile they were hardly visible at first. "We work with nature spirits here," remarked the farmer, shaking my hand firmly. "They check that the seeds are in the right position to maintain vitality. That's the secret of all the seed here, its vitality remains in all you eat." Debas yearned to return to the surface to help. "Close your eyes, Tim," Manal ordered. I closed them. When I was allowed to open them again, we were in the middle of a field of golden wheat, glowing with ripeness. The farmer at our side laughed and called, "This is what you get if you don't spray it with rubbish, but allow the crop to grow as it will." I could see it was excellent grain, even if there was an occasional cornflower, poppy or daisy adding an undeniable charm to the mass of gold. "You have to remember," Manal observed, as we walked with the farmer, "that on the surface you ship food from all over. Food imported from other lands cannot increase your vitality, as it doesn't receive the right local encouragements. It introduces something alien into your body, which often strikes a discordant note with your inherited frequency. In fact, you could say that you are consuming the thoughts and feelings of unfamiliar people, and these are then transferred to you. This affects your internal organs, unbeknownst to you. Ingesting thoughts from other countries may increase fears and phobias previously dormant. You're left wondering where those thoughts and ideas came from. Is that true?" I yelled in horror, feeling like a cannibal. "I just want to be myself." "You are yourself, don't panic." Manal laughed, thumping me on the back. "But surface dwellers will have to return to nature. Things aren't looking good for them." While we were talking, Titch had been sniffing around and cocking his leg here and there. When he sat down to do his business, I tried to stop him, but the farmer restrained me. "The best manure we have comes from animals," he said. "We bring manure from towns and houses to use on arable land. Human excrement is pulverized in situ and mixed with dung to a sandy, non-smelly powder. The best growth is the result of natural manure, not artificial like they use up there." He pointed skywards. It was strange to think of artificially fertilized fields hanging just over our heads. Of course, it was a good way off. We were in the hovercraft again. "That was a great lesson," I beamed. "I'm glad there are farmers here, and that they reap a good harvest without too much effort." "It's not a matter of effort," Manal answered. "We are willing, and we work hard. It owes a lot to the goodwill of Mother Earth, as we don't add artificial fertilizer." Now we are going to have a lesson on beliefs. 22. The Temple of Belief and a meeting with Melchizedek. "We talked about religion yesterday when your grandmother mentioned it," Manal remarked, as the hovercraft stopped in a circular garden with a small building in the center. We alighted and Titch became interested in sniffing the huge number of bushes. The small round building was like all other buildings, exquisitely beautiful and decorated with precious stones in an ornamental pattern. "This is a temple," Manal told me. "We don't have churches and priests of various beliefs as on the surface, but we do have small temples where a priest and priestess act as a link to the Godhead. There's only one divine power. We are aware of that here, and if we aren't, we soon discover it. Come with me." I trotted after my friend with the long, fair hair into the round building. A wide beam of light fell from the open roof. I couldn't understand where it came from. I knelt down like Manal, it felt right. I felt encircled by the light, overwhelmed by gentle warmth as all tensions and unwelcome thoughts dissolved and vanished. I was the light, and the light was me. It wasn't just a lovely thought, it was the truth. The existence was literally an existence made of light. I don't know if I was asleep or having a vision. I had knelt in respect for the light and had closed my eyes. When I opened them, I was sitting on a soft sofa in front of the wide light beam. A voice came from it and I shivered with goose pimples. It was so holy. So sacred. Humans, human children. A wonderful existence was created for you on beautiful, tranquil earth as part of a great family. You worked together, ate and drank together, slept together, and life was all enjoyment, beauty, and love. Above all, love. This lasted for a relatively short time. When darkness came forth and nearly extinguished the light, you were blinded by acceptance. You accepted a life of love and you accepted, without question, the encroaching darkness. You believed things were as they should be. This became a new lifestyle and encouraged alien influences and dark deeds. The darkness seeped into your minds in many ways, often disguised as light. You invented religions, which was unnecessary as there is only one God consciousness. You gave this God as many guises as grains of sand on a beach. You believed you had chosen or inherited a religion full of mysticism, stimulating your brains. You were unquestioning. You were caught in your own trap and were inspired to struggle, to be envious and jealous. Golden mammon was the root of all inspiration. All this is going to change, isn't it? I objected. The new belief for the new age will be in one leader, the God within us who leads to the highest source. Well answered, Timothy. You may proceed. The voice was happy and friendly, and Manol patted me gently on the shoulder. You're one of us officially now, Tim, he whispered. You have met one of the holy ones. Do you have those here too? I wondered in surprise. I didn't think you had holy ones as we do on earth. We don't, Manol sounded slightly offended. This is a help center. Our temples welcome all those in need of help and support. Our priests and priestesses are wise, highly developed beings who can cure mental disorder and other problems. I wanted you to know that there are centers like these across our world. You ought to have them too. I am no longer an earthling, I interrupted him. But these places would definitely be useful on the surface. It's nice to know there are temples like these. Everyone comes here, Manol replied. There are parties, singing, dancing, and various meetings. The temples have all kinds of uses, apart from protection and sanctuary for those who most need it. And it doesn't cost a thing. This last sentence was accompanied by a peal of laughter. The hovercraft was outside, as was Titch, progressing slowly and calmly from shrub to shrub, his tail held high. He nearly bowled us over with happiness when we eventually emerged from the strange house. The journey continued. We alighted at the entrance to a magnificent, circular amphitheater with stairs descending to an oval stage. I thought it was the Colosseum at Rome. On the stage was a large oval table. 12 men and women were seated around it. I realized it was the Council of 12 Intellos. Let's go and meet them, suggested Manol eagerly. We don't want to disturb them. I didn't want to end up in an investigation which was none of my business. We won't. Come on, Tim and Titch. He hurried down the circular flight of stairs and I followed doubtfully. Titch was busy trying to smell everything. As we arrived, a man rose and embraced Manol and then me. It was Saint Germain. Titch was patted too. Welcome. Sit by me, Tim, and learn a little about our society and the problems which arise here. I looked around the table. Saint Germain explained who the people were and the offices they held. There were 6 men and 6 women. An equal distribution, I remarked. That doesn't happen on Earth. There are no differences in the rights of men and women here, Saint Germain replied. The council discusses and makes decisions about possible crimes, which are rare, arguments between neighbors, also rare, food problems, and new nourishment ideas. And, of course, our eternal discussion, the surface of the earth and how we can save it. Great things are happening up there, he pointed to the sky, and there will soon be changes for the Earthlings. They have manhandled our wounded planet so harshly that the damage is obvious even here. We can't allow that. But who can control the wind? No one can. So something must be done before things decline seriously for us because of the negligence and ignorance of Earthlings. A woman was speaking. She looked middle-aged, tall, dark-haired, and beautiful. Her name was Lady Nada. I lived on the earth a long time ago, she continued. At that time, singing was a great experience, and there were many genres for various voices. Now singing seems to be an incessant out-of-tune screech. There are no melodies. Very few singers have any training like we had. The music now played on Earth is damaging the planet. It damages the people who listen and the energy of the tones. Music can be exalting, but it is destructive when there is no harmony. I want to help with those changes. The music of the sphere shall be restored to Mother Earth. There was approval of this and some clapping. The imminent changes will include even your work, my dear Lady Nada, remarked a man's voice. I'm Melchizedek, King of Kings, and I'm going to introduce some sense to these earthlings. Good manners and positive thinking. The man was incredibly impressive. He was tall and strong, yet lithe. He had long, wavy dark hair and his eyes were bright and captivating. They were brown with golden flecks. He had a clear and handsome profile, emanating strength and love. I thought there was something Indian in his appearance. His smile was incredibly bright and friendly. When he smiled, you smiled too, and enjoyed